Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today's story traces a full circle, whispers that grew into headlines, a pause that felt final, and then a quiet decision that changed the tone of everything. We are talking about Afra Saraçoğlu and Mert Ramazan Demir, two names that have occupied the same sentence for weeks, sometimes through rumor and sometimes through carefully chosen words. After a stretch of speculation about where they stood, the answer arrived at a decisive moment. Afra chose to reconcile with Mert just as a profoundly personal milestone approached in his life, a birth within his close circle that required calm, presence, and support rather than noise. What happened next was not a spectacle, it was intention. And intention, handled well, can be louder than any press release. Let's rewind to understand why this turn mattered so much. For weeks, friends, colleagues, and fans watched as fragments of a story surfaced and receded online. They saw guarded interviews, brief sightings that generated long threads, and the kind of ambiguity that invites people to project their hopes or frustrations onto silence. The question behind all that chatter was simple: will Afra and Mert find their way back to each other? The answer, as it turns out, did not arrive on a red carpet. It arrived in a private room, during a conversation that lasted long enough to sift through old misunderstandings and identify what was still worth protecting. People close to the couple described the reconciliation not as a sudden impulse, but as a sequence. Calls first. Then a meeting set on neutral ground, away from places where routine becomes a trap. They drew boundaries and decided what to put back on the table. They did not negotiate in vague terms, they traded specifics. How to handle family pressures. How to speak when tempers are high. How to keep outside commentary from steering the conversation inside the relationship. By the end of those discussions, they had something sturdier than optimism. They had a plan. The timing of that plan mattered. Mert was facing the kind of day that rearranges your inner furniture, one of those events that makes even the smallest gestures meaningful. Afra understood that context immediately and made a choice that cut through the haze of recent weeks. She would not observe from a distance. She would be present. Not as a guest drifting in and out for optics, but as someone who knew the difference between showing up and merely being seen. Her presence did not erase the past, but it reframed the present in a way that allowed both of them to breathe. Witnesses described the reunion as dignified rather than dramatic, shoulders relaxing after too many days of holding tension, a longer hug that said more than any caption could, pauses that didn't feel empty. Words were measured but warm. Afra kept the spotlight not on the past, but on the immediate need, quiet, stability, and a steady rhythm at a moment when nerves were naturally frayed. Mert, for his part, did not make promises he could not keep. He thanked her for arriving, accepted the support without defensiveness, and made room for a fresh start that would be defined by behavior over time, not by declarations crafted for trending topics. When the day of the birth arrived, Afra managed the simple logistics that become essential when emotions run high: calls to coordinate people arriving at different hours, messages to keep updates clean and factual, gentle nudges that kept well-meaning visitors from turning a hallway into a parade. She shielded where she could and stepped back where she should. Those who were there say that the tone she set, low voice, steady pace, no performative gestures, allowed everyone to focus on what mattered, rather than on what might be posted later. The online reaction ignited fast. Hashtags clustered, timelines filled with collages and throwbacks. Comments tilted toward relief rather than triumphalism, as if the audience collectively understood that reconciliation is not a trophy but a responsibility. The most repeated lines were variations on the same theme: some bonds are worth the hard conversations, and some moments ask you to put down your pride to pick up your person. Entertainment outlets, usually eager to overheat a narrative, surprised everyone by granting the story enough space to stay tender. Instead of fabricating plot twists, they echoed what sources emphasized: this wasn't a publicity loop, it was a private pivot. Friends inside the industry added context without stirring gossip. They had watched the pair navigate stress, tight schedules, and the inevitable glare that follows visible people. They saw a pattern in both personalities: ambition tempered by care, humor used as a release valve, a refusal to outsource important decisions to the algorithm. When the reconciliation became public knowledge, these friends did not offer platitudes. They offered gratitude. Gratitude that two adults had chosen to act like adults, especially when the easy thing would have been to turn a difficult chapter into content. In the days that followed the birth, the rhythm between Afra and Mert settled into something quieter and more deliberate. There were no choreographed updates, no press statements drafted to sound intimate. Instead, there were small, unremarkable decisions that build trust brick by brick, short evening walks when the city finally exhaled, dinners with a small circle where phones stayed face down, messages that didn't try to fix everything, but that arrived on time. Those details are not glamorous, which is why they work. They recalibrate the relationship away from spectacle and towards something that can survive ordinary days. It is important to emphasize what the reconciliation was not. It was not a blank check written against the past. It was not a denial of pain or a decree that there would be no arguments in the future. Every meaningful repair leaves a seam. The power of this seam is not that it disappears, but that it holds. People who were in the room say that both Afra and Mert were clear on this point. No gesture, no matter how beautiful, earns immunity from the discipline of showing up consistently. They would keep their circle small, speak when they had something real to say, and avoid turning affection into a set piece. Meanwhile, the public conversation started to evolve. Instead of demanding labels, many fans asked better questions. How do two people navigate closeness under a microscope? How do they carry pride in their careers without letting it trample their private life? How do they protect one another from the kind of commentary that treats living humans like open tabs? The answers they modeled were modest and, for that reason, convincing. You become selective, not in a defensive way but in a purposeful one. You pick your hours. You curate your inputs. You remind yourselves that silence is not absence, it is shelter. From a professional standpoint, this shift could become an asset rather than a liability. Casting directors, producers, and brand partners can read a room. They know the difference between chaos and chemistry, and they understand that public goodwill has a half-life unless it is nourished by integrity. If Afra and Mert intend to keep their personal story off the stage while staying generous with their audience through thoughtful work, they will likely find that the industry meets them halfway. Authenticity is not a strategy, but it travels well. For the people closest to the couple, the immediate impact was tangible. Tensions that had built up during the period of uncertainty began to unravel. Family members who had been trying to strike a balance between giving advice and giving space felt the general temperature drop a few degrees. Friends who had chosen neutrality now felt safe to cheer. In conversation after conversation, the message repeated. When you choose presence over distance at the exact moment it matters most, you write a paragraph that even the loudest rumor cannot erase. There is also a lesson here for anyone watching from the outside. Reconciliation is not magic. It is craft. It requires memory, remembering what hurt and what helped, and it requires editing, removing the parts that do not serve who you want to be. Afra and Mert did not promise perfection. They promised process, and process is kinder than perfection because it leaves room for humanity. They are not trying to win the internet. They are trying to win the next hour, and then the next day, and then the week after that. As the first wave of headlines fades, what remains is a story calibrated for endurance. The reunion that began as a response to a significant, intimate event has become a template for the months ahead: clear boundaries, honest check-ins, fewer witnesses, better outcomes. Their fans, many of whom have grown up while following this pair, seem ready to accept that grown-up love does not look like a montage. It looks like carrot scale, small kindnesses multiplied by time. Before we close, a word to the audience that carried this story with such grace. Your restraint mattered. You asked for updates, but you also celebrated quiet. You praised a decision that put empathy before ego. That ecosystem allowed two people to make a private choice without turning it into a public performance. In return, you received something better than a cliffhanger. You received a sustainable path forward. And so we arrive at the simplest ending this chapter could have. Afra Saraçoğlu and Mert Ramazan Demir did not erase the past, they arranged it into a shape that could be carried. They did not exchange the real work for a dramatic reveal, they exchanged speculation for presence. On a day when presence was everything, they chose each other. The rest is not guaranteed. It is earned, one ordinary decision at a time. Thank you for watching and for staying with us through stories that deserve more than a headline. If you want thoughtful coverage of the moments that actually move people, not just the moments that move metrics, make sure you are subscribed. We will be here for the next chapter, whenever they are ready to write it.